Hello and a very warm welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in and for watching Smart 24 TV. This is the point where we analyze economic policy, and my name is Anthony Sebale. Thank you so much for once again tuning in. Remember, to be part of the show, you can just follow us on Twitter. That's at Smart 24 TV now. You can also go to our YouTube channel. That's at Smart 24 TV Live, and go through our comment section, of course, to interact with the guests. And in case you have any questions concerning the topic. Well, today we are talking ICT and the role of ICT in national economy in reference to the national budget that was just read a couple of days back. And we have, of course, a lot to discuss ahead of the show, including what the allocation for ICT, especially digital transformation, means for the ICT sector in Uganda, and what challenges are to be addressed by this particular allocation. When you look at the budget this financial year, the next financial year actually, we have 191.8 billion Ugandan shillings that was allocated to digital transformation, a 67.574 billion increase from the previous financial year. Now, with only 2 years left for the achievement of NDP3, and actually we're realizing NDP3 much faster this time, unimplemented projects leave a query in, of course, whether the country can surely deliver as planned, as per the National Development Plan 3. And when you look at this increase, there's been, of course, efforts towards impacting critical programs highlighted in the national budget framework, which are, for example, the national postcode and addressing the geographic information system, as well as GOVNet projects, and a couple of other projects. Now, joining me to discuss this and more is none other than Mr. Ntege Badru. Mr. Ntege Badru is a private sector foundation of Uganda, board member, representing ICT on the board. That is on the Private Sector Foundation Uganda board. I also have an entrepreneur, a startup founder, and this is none other than Mr. Robert Bob Okello, who is currently under, of course, Marifasa. Marifasa is a startup that has, of course, focused on digital upskilling and reskilling for future work, which is quite fascinating. And I will, of course, ask him later to tell us about reskilling. Why do we need reskilling within the ICT sector? You're most welcome, gentlemen, on the point.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll start with you, Mr. Ntege. The Private Sector Foundation is a board that really represents, when you look at especially the private sector in Uganda, a lot of businesses are engaged within the private sector. And one of the things that we look at is ICT when we are looking at startups, enterprises in the 21st century. Let's first of all briefly talk about what Private Sector Foundation has, especially in as far as ICT is concerned. How much have you done? How much have you impacted? And how much have you been able to influence the enterprises in the private sector ICT-wise?
Okay, thank you and good evening. The first thing in terms of how much have we been able to influence is 78% of the recommendations that were given to government by PSFU were adopted. So out of all the recommendations we gave as PSFU, 78% of those were adopted into the budget. So that's the level of how much impact and input we deliver in terms of our activities as PSFU and the advocacy role that we do. When you now come and talk to the question of ICT and private sector, if you're running any particular business at all and you are registered as a taxpayer, you need ICT for that because you're going to file using ICT. So ICT has moved beyond just being a service within the ecosystem to be fundamental into running a business. It's just like you need energy, you need cash flow. You also need ICT. So ICT is critical and key to all businesses of all manner. And the next question then comes, how do we make it universally affordable, but also there is having ICT and not having it applied to the benefits of the business.
Yeah.
And that's really where now the next conversation comes into how to make it relevant to the business. And what does PSFU do in that instance? So as PSFU, we're running a number of projects with our partners that are really focusing on small businesses and how to make sure that small businesses are profitable and they grow and they're sustainable. Through that, there's a lot of education. We tend to assume that most assistance or growth has to come from financial. There's a lot of BDS in terms of business development and support, training for businesses. It's key that in that training we always make sure that ICT is covered in that training and how organizations apply that particular ICT. I think I've covered most of the things, but you can never exhaust the value of ICT, first as a facilitator to the business, but also as an input to actually generating value in a business. So it's key in all sorts of areas.
Wow, interesting. Mr. Robert, you work with young people, skilling and reskilling, upskilling young people in the ICT sector. In your own opinion, what is the momentum in as far as ICT is concerned amongst young people currently? When you look at the trends, when you look at the innovation within the ICT sector, where do you think we are headed?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. Now, first of all, I think as a country, we find ourselves in a very unique position. We are a very young country. Think about the average age in Uganda. And most of the young people we have across the country today are what we would describe as digital natives, right? These are people who are for the most of it born in the internet era. And so the consumption of ICT services and ICT-related services is definitely something that comes to them quite naturally as compared to, for example, the parents' generations. So when it comes to issues of adoption, we definitely see that today an average Ugandan young person has a smartphone, which means that by virtue of holding such a device, they already have access to a variety of digital services or perhaps potential targets of these digital services. But we still see a huge disparity, especially when you think about access, right, across the country. There's a big difference you see, for example, between the urban youth and the rural youth, for example. The urban youth, these are people within town areas and the major cities of the country, who for the most of it have very direct access to some of these digital services and also the scaling opportunities. On the other hand, we have the rural young people, the rural youth, who for the most of it have to overcome a lot of barriers when it comes to accessing digital services. And so as far also some of the digital and ICT related services. So these are kind of the trends that we see. But when it comes to the yearning and the eager to use some of these tools, it's something that we definitely see a lot. A lot of young people today are on social media, on a lot of these various platforms. And that shows you that, these are young people that are very, very much, appreciative of the power of these digital platforms and these digital solutions. But like I said, there still needs to be some work done in terms of bridging the gap between those, within the urban centers and those in the rural areas. And even another category, perhaps, to think of young people in refugee settlements or refugee host communities, for example, where very often, maybe due to limitations of infrastructure, there's still limited access to some of these very essential high city services. But in a nutshell, I would say that we see that young people today are very, very, passionate about how to leverage these technologies, not only to, I think it begins an excitement, spending time on social media, but very soon, I think they discover the economic potential of some of these digital platforms. People are now doing, selling on WhatsApp. It's not very uncommon to look at somebody's status today and see a lot of people selling products on their WhatsApp status, right? People leveraging the power of e-commerce today. And I think this is a trend that we'll continue seeing. But I think as more and more people, young people in particular, begin to, first of all, get the essential skills to leverage these digital platforms, we'll begin to see a lot more appreciation and actually unlocking of economic value on these digital platforms.
Yeah. Okay, what is Marifasa doing for young people, especially? You said it's a startup that's focusing on upskilling and reskilling, which was intriguing when you look at reskilling, because the ICT sector is one that has a change almost every second.
Absolutely.
You have something new every now and then. So tell us about what you're doing with the young people in as far as growing this sector is concerned.
Absolutely. At Marifasa, one of the things that we passionately believe is that access to knowledge has to be democratized, and we believe in the power of applied knowledge. And so when it comes to the digital space, as a startup, we are an education technology startup, and our focus is to upskill and reskill Africa's young people, and then match them to digital employment opportunities around the world. Now, upskilling simply means that building up on some of the foundational skills that already exist, right? And unlocking the potential that acquiring those new skills has to do. Reskilling, on the other hand, means that so I'll give you an example. If, let's say, today I'm a factory worker, right? And the rate and the pace at which automation is coming up, a lot of the factory jobs are going to be replaced by automated machines, in assembly lines and all that. Now, those factory workers whose jobs are being replaced by these automated machines will have to reskill themselves by acquiring a completely new set of skills in order to be relevant in the marketplace, right? And so that's what we are doing as a company. And why is this important? About 24% of the jobs today, according to the World Economic Forum, will actually not be in existence in the next 5 years. And 44% of the skills, of the core skills today that are required to perform most of the job functions are going to become completely redundant, which means that they're going to be replaced, and there's need for people to actually learn new skills and acquire new skills. And so this is very, very essential. Now, how does it apply in the digital space? First of all, we believe that the economic potential that the digital economy offers is a no-brainer, right? Today, 15% of the global GDP comes from the digital economy. Now, the World Bank estimates that by 2030, 30% of the global GDP will be contributed to by the digital economy. So, prioritizing the digital economy is a no-brainer, if you ask me. And so that's why it's extremely important to ensure that, one, we are ensuring what I would call, digital economic inclusion. Okay. Today we have a lot of people who, quite a few people using the internet and all that. And in Uganda, that's still, we still have a challenge in that area. I think internet penetration in Uganda, it's maybe about 24.6, around 25%, right? That is about approximately 12 million Ugandans who are using the internet, and we're a country of about 47 million people, which means that still a significant fraction of our population is still offline. Okay? And digital economic inclusion means, first of all, getting those people online, right? Because until we do that, we still have a lot of people, just a small fraction of people who are benefiting from what the digital economy has to offer. And the key passport, I believe, to the digital economy is ensuring that you have the essential skills to create value in the digital economy. And that's where upskilling and reskilling comes in, ensuring that a large fraction of our young people have the skills that they need to not only favorably compete in the digital economy, but they're equipped to be able to create and unlock value in the digital economy. That will take us very far.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Okello. Mr. Antege, what is your opinion on the budget allocation for digital transformation? When I look at the list, because this is a program-based budget, digital transformation is coming in the 17th position. Well, with an increase of 67 billion, but still coming way behind the government's priorities. What do you think? What is your overall opinion on this particular allocation of 191 billion for digital transformation?
The question really depends on not the value of the amount, is how that value is planned for. Because we know that the resource envelope is not deep enough. However, you also need now to look at what else is being done, because literally 80% of every penny spent over the next few years will have a component of digitalization. Now, if we're actually intentional on sustainable digitalization, it means that when we are building roads and we're spending the amount of money on the roads, there is a level of administration that happens in that space. So then that means that the digital investment we make for that particular role actually stays to continue building on. The whole concept of digitalization should really be looking at the transformation process, which is additive, and you constantly, it's not a one-time exercise. So besides the specific allocation into the area of digitization, each particular vote must have a component of digitalization, because votes have different components. Now, if we then look at that particular component of digitalization and we make it additive, in other words, we do have a central entity within government, I understand, which looks after the ICT function. So the way to extend that particular digitization resource envelope is to centralize a lot of the ICT decisions. And once government is encouraged to do that, it then means that the investment made for a particular project or a particular department can actually be extended to other departments. So we eliminate the duplication. And that's where the focus should really be, as opposed to the size of budget they put in place. Because if we don't create these formal structures in terms of central digitalization and you start building onto that, they will give you 3 times that amount of money in a future budget, and you still won't see the impact. So the impact is in how you use the money, not the amount of money that is given. And that's where really our conversation in terms of advocacy conversation should be around that same point, so that when we talk about digitization, we're not talking about digitizing one department. There should be a single point that I go into government and my information is shared across. Now, that extends the resource envelope wider. If all a ministry has to do is to query a central database and get my details, as opposed to that particular ministry having a similar duplicated structure as we have, which goes down to really what needs to be done is we talk digitization and then we use analog processes to digitize. Now that is where that's really the fix to stretching the budget, because the analog processes means that we're trying to digitize, but we're legislating analog, we're designing analog, we're implementing analog, and the only thing you've done is you've put a digital component in the middle. Then that isn't digitization. So that's where really the impact is, and then the budget can be stretched. So I think that the focus really should be at that point.
When you look at the priorities government has, digitizing the economy is one of them, and the Digital Uganda vision. And which is also a national policy and strategic framework. But currently, when you look at just scanning through the ICT sector in Uganda, we have over 20.5 million mobile users. When you look at mobile subscribers, people who are using mobile money, people who are using mobile phones. And with the effects of COVID-19, mobile phone usage has transitioned from just a simple means of communication to a tool enabling us to access services like health, education, trade, and a couple of other things joined together. But when you look at still what Mr. Okello was saying, 70% of these 20.5 million are offline, meaning they don't access internet, or they find it hard at least to access it on a daily, so they cannot regularly be able to access internet. Don't you think that one of the things that this allocation should be looking at is internet access, increasing internet access from just us having very expensive data bundles, but also having free Wi-Fi across the country in, for example, business spots like the central business district, like in town or in buses? What would you say about that, Mr. Badu?
I tend to be very unpopular on my view on this concept of free internet. You see, somehow, somewhere, someone has to pay for that. And the more people you have utilizing a service as far as digitization is concerned, the cheaper the service becomes, because it's a collective value.
Yeah.
So it's important that you widen the number of users, but if you widen the number of users while artificially fixing a price, then you'll have a problem. The internet can grow very well under market forces if your interventions on a slightly different pace. We talked about the 20 million people connected on the internet. Then when you actually now go back and look at the spread of our population, and there are some fixed real numbers, but they're the numbers that are matching that we'll look at. And those numbers, I'm sure the economists will put this to a test, but those numbers tell us that we have 10% of our population that will be able to spend 150,000 shillings a day upwards. You have another 30% of the population that will spend between 5,000 shillings and 150,000 shillings in a day, quite comfortably. Then you have the other 60% that is between 0 and 5. However, between that 0 and 5, there's a lot of physical movement of money. So if you're looking at transaction value, that transaction value is high down there. So now supposing we then created a one-time intervention that made sure that we included another 20 million people with a smartphone. Now that would then now create this entry point into users, create more value for a network. If you look at how digital assets are valued worldwide, if I build a startup, I will get investors putting money in me if I tell them I now have half a million users. That is how value is created. I could have an amazingly wonderful idea, but if I do not have subscribers, then I will actually not get the investors into play. So how do we attract that? We attract that by, instead of reducing the price of the internet, find a way of making sure that we convert 2 million cartouches into digital, right? That conversion will create a natural growth of maybe another 500,000, right? Because now, if I've been communicating with you, and now, hey, guess what? I can do WhatsApp, I will convince you to do that. Now, the point is, it's not that you did not have the money to get the smartphone, but you did not have the value for it. The story goes about the first, those of us who remember a fax machine, it was useless until you had somebody else to send a fax to. Right? So again, this person in the village, in this 60% conversation we talked about, if they do not have the other person to actually be able to communicate with, then they will not be motivated for the smartphone. So that trigger, that catalytic trigger, is what's actually needed to grow the base. When you grow that base, you're going to grow the usage. When you grow the usage, the prices will come down. So it's about really understanding how the digital economy works. And I think we've not actually been able to communicate this well enough to the policymakers to actually understand that. So we then end up getting those popular approaches, which is, yes, reduce the price of the internet, but you can't artificially do that. It's market forces. We saw what happened in other countries when you try to artificially set prices in a market economy. It's very difficult. So as much as I would love it, I don't think it's sustainable. So let's grow the market, then the prices will come down naturally.
No, thank you, Mr. Antegi. I'll come back after the break with the same on you, Okello, especially when you're dealing with startups, internet access. Why is this vital, and what can be done in this budget allocation to improve the internet access? My name is Anthony, and we are still discussing the role of ICT to our national economy, and particularly looking at the allocations in the national budget. We are taking a very quick breather. We'll return shortly. Stay with us.